Video 17, Step 7. How should results be interpreted? The decision rule table that we can see here can be used to determine the appropriate classification of coverage based on the number of people who have responded that they swallowed the drug, which is our measure for preventative chemotherapy coverage. Let's walk through this chart. First, we have our survey populations for our given diseases and the coverage thresholds which are associated with them. These are specified by the World Health Organization. On the right, we also have our decision rules. These are based on the number of people who are covered, meaning the number of people who answered that they swallowed the drugs out of our 20 people sampled. These ranges differ by drug due to the different target coverage thresholds for disease. Looking at these decision rules closer, we can see the interpretations for our coverage conclusions. Good coverage indicates that it is very likely, about 9 times out of 10, that the coverage in the supervision area is above the threshold. Inadequate coverage indicates that it is very unlikely, about 9 times out of 10, that the coverage in the supervision area is actually below the threshold. Cannot conclude that coverage is good, our third option, means that when the number covered falls within this range, we cannot conclude if coverage is above or below the threshold, but it assumed that it is likely consistent with or close to the threshold level. Here is a sample data collection form. To determine coverage, we look at how the number of people who replied yes to being offered and swallowing the drug compare. However, for our decision rule chart, we mostly care about the number of people who have swallowed the drug, which is the right-hand column. This will be the number that we will use to correspond with the reported coverage. Now, let's look at a few more examples in depth. For Scenario 1, we are using the SCT to classify coverage for lymphatic filariasis and ask to interpret the following results. We can see that 17 out of 20 people who were offered the drug swallowed it. According to the decision rule table, 17 out of 20 people swallowing the drug could be classified as good, meaning that it is above the target threshold. This is because 17 is greater than 16, which is the minimum number listed in the table for classifying the supervision area as good for lymphatic filariasis. This appears consistent with the reported coverage of 88% in the implementation unit, as this number is also above the target threshold of 65%. We also do not see an issue with non-compliance, as everyone who was offered the drug actually swallowed it. Next, for Scenario 2 with soil-transmitted helminths, we see that we had 19 people out of 20 who were offered the drug and 16 people who swallowed it. Right away, we can notice that there is a discrepancy between the number offered and the number who swallowed, which indicates that there may be an issue with compliance. We can see that our reported coverage for our implementation unit is 70%. However, going back to the decision chart, having 16 people who swallowed the drug falls within our cannot conclude that coverage is good range. This, plus our suspicion of non-compliance, suggests that follow-up activities should be taken to determine why coverage could be low. In Scenario 3, we can see that the reported coverage for this program is high, at 90%, but only 11 out of 20 people surveyed were both offered and swallowed the drug. Looking at the decision tree for schistosomiasis, we can see that 11 falls under the category of inadequate coverage, indicating that follow-up actions need to be taken immediately. Additionally, the large discrepancy between reported coverage for the implementation unit and the SCT results suggests that there are issues within the reporting system. At this point, the SCT team should discuss what steps to take immediately to see if there's anything that can be done to reach those who weren't covered, and what can be done in the long term to identify problems with the reporting system. Lastly, we have Scenario 4. In this example, the SCT results suggest that the coverage cannot be classified as good, as 16 does not meet the good coverage threshold. However, the reported coverage results suggest that it is much higher, suggesting that there is a discrepancy which needs to be investigated. It is important to note that although we would ideally like to see coverage results that fall in the good coverage zone all the time, Just because they fall in the cannot conclude that coverage is good doesn't mean that coverage is necessarily below the threshold, but it is better to err on the side that coverage could be bad and take steps to improve the coverage, rather than assuming it is good and taking no follow-up actions. Because our sample size is so small, we have very low power for correctly identifying when coverage is above threshold unless the coverage is very high. Similarly, we have low power for identifying when coverage is below the threshold unless it is very low. This will be discussed further when describing development of an action plan. For your SCT, it will be important to walk through each of the discussions above when analyzing your data. The SCT also probes individuals on reasons why they are not offered the drug or why they did not swallow it, which can lend valuable insight to determining which actions to take. Appendices 12 and 13 in the SCT section of the Preventative Chemotherapy Monitoring and Evaluation Guidelines can assist in facilitating this process. Appendix 12, the SCT Data Summary, provides a space to summarize SCT results and numbers of people who responded yes to being offered and swallowing the drug. Appendix 13, the SCT Critical Review, provides a list of questions which help break down what each of these numbers mean, how they compare to reported coverage, and what next steps should begin to look like. Check for understanding. Why is it important that coverage estimates are based on the number of people who swallowed the drug instead of the number of people who are offered the drug? What are some reasons why reported coverage rates may not match the SCT results? Hint: think of limitations of the SCT which were mentioned before. If there is any uncertainty about how to interpret SCT results, please review this video again.